Hello and welcome to the second video in the PR Vision series, Engaging Internal Communications. I'm Philip Smith, Head of Content Solutions at PR Week, and joining me here in the studio are two communications experts from the private and the public sectors. I'd like to introduce Louise Terry, Group Director of Internal and External Communications at L'Oréal UK, and Alex Aitken, Communications and Strategy Director at Westminster City Council. We're now going to hear from each of our panellists, and we're going to hear their three top tips for successful internal communications.
The first most essential point is unless you understand staff opinion, unless you can survey staff opinion regularly and understand how your colleagues feel about your corporate mission, how they feel about their own managers and the leadership of the organisation, you are just doing internal comms in the dark. So regular surveys are the foundation that give you the credibility to argue the case for internal communications at the top table. Second, any internal communications that sets out a promise of action or a pledge or an expectation of delivery to staff has to be acted upon, and closing the feedback loop from when you ask staff a question and then showing what has been done is absolutely critical. Third, celebrate success. Within your organisation, there are probably people who I would term as organisational assassins who don't believe in the mission of the organisation, and those people can have a real detrimental effect on the rest of the authority or business. So making sure that those who deliver exceptional customer service or exceptional performance in other ways are celebrated and are seen to be rewarded helps set the sort of behaviours and values that you will want your organisation to deliver.
So my three top tips, in no particular order, are first of all, I think that variety is really important. We're all very excited about new techniques like digital and social media, but in fact the simple tool of bringing people together and face-to-face communications, breakfasts with managers and more junior people, all those things work really well. And I think variety is important as well because people get so much email that it's nice to have different ways of communicating. The second thing I think that's really important is that the way you communicate has to represent the values of the brand or the business. You have to try and avoid corporate speak, which is a very easy thing to fall back into, particularly when you're communicating bad news. And the third thing is of course very obvious, but communication has to be regular. It's not something that you can start and then stop, and it's not something that you can just do once a month when it suits you. Once you've gone down that path of engaging with employees, you have to keep it going and you have to listen to them too.
With internal communications, it's not all about, I'm afraid, good news. There's obviously an element of crisis communications there as well. If I could start with you, Louise, what sort of examples have you got where you've had to be very sensitive about what you do in internal communications because you're in a crisis situation?
I think we realised a couple of years ago that L'Oréal is a hugely well-known brand. It's in the press a lot. And of course our employees read that. So we can talk a lot about our values, but when they read perhaps something different in the press, it's very important for us to reassure people that we're an ethical company, we have integrity, that we do things a certain way. So one example of that was when there was some media coverage towards the end of 2009 about Cheryl Cole, who was our brand spokesmodel for L'Oréal Paris, who was promoting a shampoo that volumized, who was wearing hair extensions. In fact, hair extensions are part of Cheryl Cole's look. She always wears them. We stated in the advert that she was wearing them, but there were some people who didn't find that satisfactory. In fact, the ASA were happy with it. But for us, the challenge was to make sure that, and we didn't do it very well at the time, but we've got a lot better, is to realise that our employees, when they go home, this is something that was very much in the media, and they were going to be asked about it in the pub. And we didn't equip them with an easy, quick answer that would make them feel confident about defending L'Oréal. So we've spent a lot of effort actually since then to make sure that every time there's any issue that appears in the media regarding the safety of cosmetics, the ethics behind cosmetics, be it animal testing, any issue that they could be asked about, that they're equipped with very straightforward, very honest, open answers that they can use.
Alex, what about yourself? Where does crisis communications and internal communications, where do they converge? And what examples do you have of that happening for Westminster?
Well, any major crisis that affects central London inevitably involves Westminster as a local authority. If you take something like the 7/7 tragedy, if you take the poisoning of the Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko and the understanding that there was potentially polonium poisoning around central London, in a real civil emergency situation, you've got to be absolutely clued into your emergency planning team and your business continuity plans, and that is partly a matter of making sure you are part of that arrangement, and partly to do with the fact that you should, practice for those sort of emergencies. We learnt 3 lessons from the experience of the past year or so. First, honesty. There is no point in saying to colleagues, it's going to be all right, when it's clearly not, and they can see on the television that there's a major, national requirement to do something that will impact on their jobs. And I think some organisations take a very paternalistic view and say it's going to be all right, we'll see you through. Well, it's not. We're going to have to change. That honesty allows staff to plan, but it sometimes means that chief executives, and I think of the chief executive of Birmingham, who was very honest with his 20,000 plus staff and said, look, we're going to have to lose some of you. Things are going to have to change. I think people appreciate that because they understand what the worst that can happen is. Second, in that context of job losses, a sense of fairness. Explain to people that there will be a process, and using your internal comms channels to say, look, these are the dates on which we'll take the decisions which will impact potentially on your livelihood. And third, a sense of hope. And this is where internal comms campaigns come in, that you say to people, look, being honest with you, you might lose your job. We're showing you that there is a fair process which you will go through in terms of choosing who will stay and who will go, but we are also running this initiative which, you could term an efficiency campaign. We have our Spend It Like It's Yours campaign, where you say, look, if you can help us reduce spending in non-essential areas, then it is more likely we can keep some of you in jobs, and that's good for the public service, and it's good for you. So I think in terms of major emergencies, internal comms is critical for making staff understand what they can and should say to reassure the public. And in terms of the organisations that are facing big challenges, honesty is absolutely key, as Louis said.
How important are things like intranets, and when is social media appropriate for internal comms? Is that a useful tool, or is it just inappropriate?
Primarily depends on the organisation and how the organisation wants to consume media. Westminster Council is an authority that gets things done. We manage Central London, and in a sense our culture is very much, in terms of our staff, tell us what we need to do, involve us, but then we'll go and get it done. And therefore the electronic briefings, the intranet, the online newsletter backed up by those face-to-face briefings do it for us. Now, we do quite a lot of digital communications, less social media. We have staff forums on the intranet, but in terms of those conversations, they don't really fit with what we are trying to do. If there's an opportunity, if there's a particular campaign, then we will certainly utilise those sort of channels.
Yeah. Louise, I saw you nodding. do you agree with that? And is it different, though, for L'Oréal as opposed to Westminster?
It's not, funny enough, that different. I mean, I agree that we tend to see social media probably as a way of communicating externally. So, and part of our challenge is then how to make sure all the brands are using it in an appropriate way, and that somebody is trained who knows how to answer questions from the outside world. And that actually is another important point, I think, about internal comms, is this idea of employees being ambassadors. And I think it's something that we realised that we'd almost ignored it a little bit too much when we had our issue a couple of years ago with Cheryl Cole and the hair extensions, you may remember. This is a question that people were being asked by their friends in the pub in the evening, and we didn't give them the answers. And I think we realised then that we'd been very focused on public affairs and dealing with everything that was going on, but we hadn't really geared up our employees to know how to answer it and what it meant. And I think part of the importance for us now is realising that we need to use internal communications to communicate the values of L'Oréal to employees, to make them feel reassured that we're an ethical company with integrity. And we now have a mechanism that any time an issue happens, which is fairly regularly in the media, there'll be something about cosmetics or one of our brands, that we treat them as the first audience, that they understand what it is, what we've done. For example, recently with the terrible crisis in Japan, we wanted our employees to know that we had taken steps to help our employees, that we'd raised money, that we'd... So those kind of things are very important. But the pub test is making sure they know what to say.
In this series, in PR Vision, we're talking a lot about different areas of communications, and often it's being framed in a digital context. And it seems to me that digital is such an all-encompassing factor in the way that communications is developing. Is digital the biggest factor that's changing the way you approach internal communications now? And if so, why? And if not, What is the factor?
Every member of staff, if asked, will say, I want messages from my immediate manager. So, big tick there, face-to-face communications. And supporting that through briefing those managers, paper or more often email, absolutely cornerstone of what we do. Then it's a mix of things. Yes, it's increasingly moving digital, and it's been interesting that we have a staff, a newspaper, Westwards, relatively highly rated when it started in 2003, ratings dropped off. Last year, partly in response to budget cuts, we put it online. It works beautifully online, and that's great, and that's brought its ratings back up to where we would like them to be. It's valued by staff. Then we had the question of the chief exec's blog. New chief executive said, I want to do a blog, and we all thought, oh God, we've got to write it, and it will take ages, and he'll forget to do it. And then the light bulb moment was, why don't we just film it? Why don't we just film it and put it on the intranet? And that's what we do, and it's done methodically, and it's done on time, and it's more interesting. Now, the trick there is, as with a written blog, you've got to understand that after about 90 seconds, 2 minutes, even my chief executive may begin to sort of sound like, he said all the key things that he needs to say. So brevity and focus is key.
But I think variety is the key to internal communications. I think people, I don't know about you, but certainly at L'Oréal, we are swamped by email. I mean, that's probably our biggest threat, actually, is that people just receive so much information every day. So actually, we've almost gone back, I'd say, to more face-to-face communication. Yeah. We do film my country manager quite regularly and do a little sort of podcast or webcast about, important times of the year, results, that kind of thing, reminding people what priorities are. Like you, we stopped doing a newsletter and put it online. In fact, I think we might go back to something that physically people can look at and take home, because we realise that people quite like to sort of share it with their families, look at the pictures. So in a way, I think you need to be careful not to sort of ditch all the old techniques that work very well in favour of new trendy things. But the mix is really important, I think.
There's so much more feedback now you can get on such a larger scale from people affected by what you do and what your organisation does, that I'm interested in how internal comms has changed to reflect that. Louise, what about the challenge for you in terms of the company vision and values and getting that out to staff, and also in taking on the feedback that they come back with?
Well, I'm smiling because the note of competition, I think, always works a treat. Yeah. And so certainly with us, with 23 different brands, and you can imagine the strident marketing people in them, when we offer people the chance to come together and share best practice, it's amazing what, they're not going to be outdone by somebody else. So we did actually, and we do a lot of getting people physically together. But the cost-cutting one, we have a sort of forum that we do probably once every couple of months where we get around 100 of the more senior managers together. And it's always got a theme. So we've done one on digital, and they share the best, the best case studies they've got of what they've done using social media. But we did one on cost saving. And it was incredible. So everybody was showing, actually, marketing effectively how brilliantly they'd done some cost-saving scheme within their business. So introducing an element of competition, I think, works really well.
We shouldn't forget, in terms of internal comms, we're talking about our organisations, but internal comms within our own public relations or wider communication teams. I mean, we make sure, twice a year we have an away afternoon or away morning where we get together, we talk about what we've achieved, we talk about what we want, we invest strongly in professional development. And then the sort of initiatives that Louise was just referring to. I mean, I remember we had a sort of apprentice-style test where we got people to invent and market a cocktail. We gave them some quite bizarre ingredients. But that sort of creative stuff and that opportunity for PR staff to receive some internal comms and some engagement and feel they're part of the organisation shouldn't be underestimated in terms of getting, better outputs and outcomes from our own staff.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for now, but I would like to say thank you to our two experts on internal communications. I'd like to thank Alex and I'd like to thank Louise. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for watching PR Vision. See you next time.